So before I get started, I want to just mention that I'm giving a couple of talks here at the conference. So today, this talk is a basic talk on understanding the psychology of eating animals, understanding CARNISM. I'll talk for just about 30 minutes, so we have plenty of time for conversation after Q&A. Tomorrow, I will be giving a talk that's specifically for vegans and vegetarians, and it's understanding how to use our understanding of CARNISM, the psychology of eating animals, to communicate about the issue more effectively. So there we go. Take a moment and look at these lovely images. And I do these searches every time I'm working on the presentation. I do these searches to get new images, and it can become a real obsession because there's just so much out there, and they're just so adorable and fascinating. I like to show these images for a reason. And they're, like I said, whenever I begin this presentation, I start out by talking about how when I do make new slides, it takes me forever to find just the right images that really convey what I'm trying to communicate. Because there are so many of them to sort through. I mean, there are literally thousands of images that really capture that childlike sense of wonder, that understanding, that caring. And so because I'll be talking about this human, non-human connection throughout this presentation, I want to start out and just do a brief exercise with you. So I'd like you to just try to take a moment to think about any animal that you have felt a connection with in your life, or animals that you have felt a connection in your life. So maybe it was a dog, the horse you took riding lessons on, or your next door neighbor's guinea pig. Maybe it was the dog you grew up with, or a hurt bird you rescued, or maybe it was a fish or a turtle. Or maybe it was somebody else. So I want to take a poll. Raise your hand if you were able to think of at least one animal. That was way too easy. Okay, raise your hand if you have ever felt cared about or loved by an animal. And take a look around the room. That was easy too. And that's a whole lot of caring. And our experience tells us something important, right? I mean, we care about animals. We feel connected to them. And when I'm talking about caring about animals, I'm not even talking about some deep emotional love. I mean, many of us do feel that, but for some of us, it's just an identification with animals, understanding that we have certain things in common, that we feel pleasure, we feel pain, we have lives that matter to us. So we care about animals. We feel connected to them. And we can see examples of this everywhere. We teach our children to be kind to animals, not to harm them. We make animals the heroes of our children's stories and the stars of their shows. When we catch a glimpse of a deer through the trees, or when we see dolphins leaping out of the ocean, or when we notice a delicate butterfly resting on a flower, we often feel that sense of awe that makes us just stop and speak in hushed voices. When we hear of an abused or mistreated animal, we recognize the injustice and we feel outraged. When we're at the petting zoo and the piglet chooses our hand to eat out of, we feel special. We get excited. Can you relate to some of these feelings? I mean, I certainly can too. So I want to tell you just a little bit about me and my story and how I came to be here today. This is a picture from 1970. Of me and my dog Fritz. My mother tells me that we adopted Fritz when he was about 2 months old and I was about 2 years old. So we were really both just babies when we met. Now, Fritz was my first dog, but he was also my first friend. We did everything together. We played together, we napped together, and we even vomited together once during a sickening road trip, and that is a true story. And Fritz was also my first heartbreak when he died at the age of 13 of liver cancer. And what I didn't realize back then was that Fritz, or actually more accurately, my relationship, my connection with Fritz, would be the catalyst for my life's work, which is to raise awareness of the psychological disconnection, what I refer to as the gap in our consciousness when it comes to our relationship with animals. Now, this gap has a profound impact on ourselves and on our world. It causes us to act against our deepest values, and it is a foundation of global suffering. So becoming aware of this gap is critical to personal and global empowerment. Because when we become aware of this gap, we can make our choices more freely. Without awareness, there is no free choice. Now, to explain what I mean by this gap, I want to do a brief exercise. I'd like you to imagine that you're a guest at a dinner party and your host serves you a dish that looks like this. Now consider whether you would find it delicious or disgusting. And no, don't raise your hand. I'm not taking a poll on this one. So for those of you who would find it delicious, imagine you find it so delicious that you ask your host for the recipe. And she replies that the secret is in the meat. You need to use 3 pounds of well-seasoned, golden retriever. Now, I wish I could just have a camera up here when I do that. Now take a moment to reflect on your thoughts and feelings. I mean, chances are what you just thought of as food, you now think of as a dead animal. What you just felt was delicious, you now feel is disgusting. Chances are your experience of the meat dramatically changed, even though nothing about the meat itself actually changed. So what changed? What do you think? Exactly. What changed is your perception of the meat. Now, our perception is the lens that we look at the world through. And when it comes to eating animals, our perception is shaped largely, if not entirely, by our culture. In meat-eating cultures around the world, out of over millions of possible species, people tend to classify or learn to classify only a tiny handful as edible. All the rest are inedible and disgusting. So even though the type of species consumed changes from culture to culture, members of all cultures tend to think of their own choices as rational and the choices of other cultures as irrational and often even offensive. So what's striking is not the presence of disgust, but rather the absence of disgust. Why are we not disgusted by the select species we have learned to think of as edible? And why don't we ever ask why? Have you ever wondered why you might eat chicken's wings, but not swan's wings? For those of you who are not vegan or vegetarian. Leg of lamb, but not leg of kitten? I mean, they're both from baby animals. Have you ever wondered why you might eat fish soup, but not lizard soup? Hen's eggs, but not pigeon's eggs? Have you ever wondered why you might drink cow's milk, but not pig's milk? And have you ever wondered why you haven't wondered? When it comes to edible animals, we have a disconnect. We don't make the conscious connection between the meat on our plate and the living being it once was. For instance, like many people, I grew up with a dog who I loved like a family member, and I also grew up eating animals. And over the course of so many years and so many meals, I never thought about how strange it was that I could pet my dog with one hand while I ate a pork chop with the other. A pork chop that had once been an animal who was at least as intelligent and sentient as my dog. And to be honest, when I was eating the pork chop, I didn't actually think I was eating an animal. So I just had that knowing without knowing. I had a gap in my consciousness. Okay, so where does this gap come from, and what are its consequences? That's the question I started asking in 1989, after half a lifetime ago, more than that now, after being hospitalized for eating what turned out to be my very last hamburger, a burger that was contaminated by a dangerous foodborne bacteria. Now, before I got sick, I had been increasingly uncomfortable with the idea of eating animals. I mean, I had seen on a handful of occasions information about the horrors of animal agriculture. I knew on some level that eating animals was antithetical to my personal values. Like most people, I cared about animals, and I didn't want them to suffer, especially when that suffering was so intensive and so completely unnecessary. And yet, I hadn't been ready to take that information in. So my response had always been like, don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal. But after I got sick, I never wanted to eat another hamburger, or for that matter, any meat again. And so I didn't. And then something interesting happened to me. When I stopped eating animals, I made the connection. I had a shift of consciousness, a paradigm shift. In other words, I didn't see different things. I saw the same things differently. And I became very curious as to how rational, caring people like myself could just stop thinking when it came to eating animals. So I spent probably about 20 years asking questions or looking for answers, including about a decade of research that culminated in my doctoral dissertation on the psychology of eating meat. And to share with you what I discovered, I want to start out by talking about a few words. So we all know that a vegan is a term we use to describe an individual who follows the belief system we call veganism, and vegetarian is a person who follows the belief system we call vegetarianism. But what do we call somebody who is not a vegan or vegetarian? You can shout it out. Don't be shy. Somebody who hasn't read my book. And yes, omnivore probably today is the most common, it's in my experience. Or sometimes carnivore, right? Do you guys say this here? And meat eater, which is maybe as common as omnivore. But let's look at these terms for just a minute. An omnivore, by definition, is an animal, human or non-human, who can ingest both flesh and plant matter, right? And a carnivore is an animal who needs to ingest flesh in order to survive. So both omnivore and carnivore describe one's biological predisposition, not one's ideological or philosophical choice. And meat eater describes a behavior as though it's divorced from a belief system. I mean, this is why we don't call vegans plant eaters, because we recognize that the behavior of eating plants reflects a deeper belief system or ideology. We tend to assume that only vegans and vegetarians bring their beliefs to the dinner table. But the only reason many of us eat pigs but not dogs, for example, is because we do follow a belief system. So this is what I discovered. There is an invisible belief system or ideology, same thing, that conditions us to eat certain animals. And I named that system CARNISM. It's essentially the opposite of veganism. Now, CARNISM is a dominant ideology. That means it's invisible, it's entrenched, it's like woven through the very structure of society to shape norms, laws, beliefs, behaviors, etc. And it's also a violent ideology. Meat cannot be procured without violence, and egg and dairy production cause extensive harm to animals. Today, these two industries, the egg and dairy industries, are probably the most brutal of all carnistic industries. And systems such as CARNISM actually run counter to core human values. Values such as compassion and justice and authenticity. So they need to use a set of defense mechanisms. These defense mechanisms distort our thoughts and numb our feelings so that we act against our values without fully realizing what we are doing. In other words, CARNISM teaches us how not to feel. Now, the main defense of CARNISM is denial, which is expressed through invisibility. The ideology itself is unnamed and therefore invisible, so we can't even question it. And, of course, the victims are kept out of sight and therefore conveniently out of public consciousness. For example, 1.2 billion farmed animals are killed, slaughtered globally every, I want you to guess, every what? Now, this refers only to land animals, okay? So 1.2 billion land animals are slaughtered, what do you think, every year? Every 6 months? Every month? Okay, a few people per month? Every week? If you guessed week, you guessed correctly. So, in 1 week, more farmed animals are slaughtered than the total number of people killed in all wars throughout history. Think about it. It is astounding. And think about this. How many of these animals have you seen? So where are they? I mean, given that their body parts are literally everywhere we turn, why don't we ever see them alive? Well, we don't see the animals whose bodies become our food because we're not supposed to. Approximately 98% of the meat, eggs, and dairy that make it to our plates come from animals who are raised in factory farms. They're windowless sheds in remote locations that are virtually impossible to obtain access to. And yet, despite the fact that these animals are treated as commodities, they are, in fact, sentient, intelligent individuals. Pigs, for example, are as intelligent as 3-year-old human children. Cows form deep and lasting bonds with their offspring and members of other species as well. Chickens and hens have been found to exhibit altruistic behaviors. They'll actually risk their own well-being in order to protect others. And scientists have demonstrated the intelligence and sentience of certain fish and crustaceans such that in some places in the world today, it's illegal to harm them. Now, I'm going to show in a minute a very short, a 2-minute video of undercover footage in animal factories, which can be difficult to watch. But I encourage you to see this because I believe that the awareness that, the empowerment that awareness ultimately brings will be well worth your discomfort. And this is feedback I've gotten from thousands of people over the years. However, if it's too much for you, or if you've already seen this before, you don't need to watch it again. Just close your eyes and plug your ears. I'll keep the sound low enough so you can block most of it out. So we're going to need sound on this.
Piglets are castrated by workers who cut into their skin and rip out their testicles. Next, the workers chop off their tails. Once pigs have reached market weight, they are sent to slaughter. At the slaughterhouse, pigs are knocked in the head with a steel rod, hung upside down, and have their throats slit. Improper stunning condemns many pigs to having their throats slit while they are fully conscious and suffering. Because male chicks don't lay eggs and do not grow quickly enough to be raised profitably for meat, they are killed within hours after hatching. The females have it even worse. Workers use a hot blade or laser to remove part of the chick's beaks. At the slaughter plant, the birds are dumped from their crates, then roughly snapped upside down into moving shackles by their fragile legs. They are then pulled across a blade which slices their throats, causing blood to pour from their necks. Calves on dairy farms are dragged away from their mothers and violently killed. The majority of today's dairy cows are confined on factory farms. Workers subject young cows to painful mutilations and amputations. Unreliable stunning practices at the slaughterhouse condemn many cattle to having their throats cut and their limbs hacked off while still alive and conscious. Massive trawling nets indiscriminately drag hundreds of tons of fish and other animals along the ocean floor. They are then tossed on board where the surviving fish either suffocate or are crushed to death.
Okay, the longest 2 minutes of this entire presentation is over. Thank you. I know it's not easy to see that. Before we move on, I want to just point out that this footage focuses on standard industry practices, and they applies to so-called organic or humane or bio facilities as well. What do you say here in England? Is it in the US we say humane, and in Germany they say bio when you talk about, I don't know, happy meat? What's it called? Free range or organic? You don't say bio? No, okay. Okay, that's good for me to know. I've traveled around the world a lot, and there's always different ways of saying this. So, okay, free range or organic. So this refers to free range or organic facilities as well. So animals clearly pay a high price for our carnism, but animals are not the only victims of the system. Another set of victims are the meat packers and slaughterhouse workers who have to work in a highly dangerous, death-saturated environment, and not surprisingly have been found to have high rates of addictions and post-traumatic stress. And our environment is an invisible victim of carnism. According to the United Nations, animal agriculture is one of the most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems facing the world today. And we are the invisible victims of carnism. We pay for our carnism with our health, as eating animals has been linked to some of the most prevalent and deadly diseases in the world today. Everything from heart disease, obesity, diabetes, cancer. And we also pay for our carnism with our hearts and with our minds. We pay for our carnism with the gap in our consciousness. So invisibility is the main defense of the system for obvious reasons. But do you think invisibility alone is enough to maintain the entire system? I mean, of course not. I mean, hints of the truth surround us. So we need to be able to justify eating animals as well. And the way that we learn to justify eating animals is by learning to believe that the myths of meat, eggs, and dairy are the facts of meat, eggs, and dairy. Now, these myths are expressed largely through what I refer to as the 3 N's of justification. Fill in the blanks. Eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary. This is an amazing exercise. So I've given this carnism presentation on 5 continents now, and it doesn't matter where I go. And I often have large audiences of primarily meat eaters. I gave this recently in Korea. Everybody knows the answers to these questions. Because we've heard it all before, right? Think about it. Slavery is normal, natural, and necessary. Heterosexual supremacy, male dominance is normal, natural, and necessary. Heterosexual supremacy is normal, natural, and necessary. Now, a related myth is the humane or bio myth, or as you might say, the organic or free-range myth. This is a myth. For example, most of us would probably consider it cruel to slaughter a happy, healthy 6-month-old golden retriever just because people like the way her thighs taste. And yet, when the exact same thing is done to individuals of other species, the meat, egg, and dairy industries want us to call that humane, ethical, organic. Another related myth is the protein myth, this myth that you have to eat animals and lots of animals to get your protein. Now, there's indisputable evidence today demonstrating that this is in fact a myth. And did you know you could be strong enough to lift a car without having eaten an ounce of animal protein in your life? I kid you not. And today, more and more professional athletes are choosing to adopt a vegan or a plant-based diet simply to enhance athletic performance and improve health. Patrick Boubomian, who's the strongest man, Germany's strongest man there on the right, is actually one of the speakers here and has a new book out if you're interested. But so the myths of meat prevail, right? And they prevail despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And that is largely because carnism is institutionalized. It's embraced and maintained by all of the major social institutions. So, for example, when we study nutrition, we actually study carnistic nutrition. Carnistic bias is embedded within the very foundations of society. And when we are born into an institutionalized system such as carnism, we inevitably internalize the system. We learn to look at the world through the lens of carnism. And carnism uses a set of defenses that distort our perceptions of meat, eggs, dairy, and the animals we eat so that we can feel comfortable enough to consume them. For example, carnism teaches us to see animals as abstractions, as lacking any individuality or personality of their own. A pig is a pig, and all pigs are the same. And when we look at the world through the lens of carnism, we fail to see the absurdities of the system. And Voltaire was right. If we believe absurdities, we shall commit atrocities. And carnism is but one of the many atrocities, one of the many violent ideologies that are an unfortunate part of the human legacy. And although the experience of each set of victims will of course be unique, the ideologies themselves are structurally similar because the mentality that enables the violence is the same. It's the mentality of domination and subjugation, of privilege and oppression. It's the mentality that causes us to turn someone into something, to reduce a life to a unit of production. It is the might makes right mentality that makes us feel entitled to wield complete control over the lives and deaths of those with less power, just because we can, and to feel justified in our actions because they're only savages, women, animals. It is the mentality of meat. So, eating animals is not simply a matter of personal ethics. It is the inevitable end result of a deeply entrenched oppressive system. And in this way, eating animals is really a social justice issue. And now this brings us to our conclusion. Knowing what we know about the problem of carnism, what do we do about it? What is the solution to the gap in our consciousness? I want to address this question with another question for you. Why do you think we use these carnistic defense mechanisms in the first place? What's the point? It takes a lot of psychic energy to stay blind to what's right in front of us and to numb ourselves out and block our awareness. So why bother? It would be a lot easier just to be upfront about it all. Does anyone want to guess? It's definitely inherited. Yeah, absolutely. It's passed down. It's a way of thinking and a way of being that's passed down for thousands of years, hundreds of years at least, yeah. But why not just break that pattern? I mean, we've kind of learned to do this, but we have to keep reinforcing it ourselves. Why bother? It's a lot. Well, that's true. It makes it easier. We don't want to stand out from everybody else. But why not just be honest about the fact that we're eating dead animals? That's exactly right. We go through all the psychological gymnastics because we care. We could still choose to eat animals and not stand out. We could choose to eat animals for other reasons, but we numb ourselves out largely because we care. If you think about it, I mean, we care about animals, we care about justice, and we care about the truth. And carnism depends on our not caring, and the entire system is built on deception. And so our caring is actually both the problem and the solution. Our caring is what makes us want to turn away from the truth. But our caring is also what gives us the courage to see the truth. It's what gives us the courage to bear witness. Bearing witness is being willing to see the truth with our eyes and minds as well as with our hearts. When we bear witness, we close the gap in our consciousness and we reconnect with our natural empathy, so that when we make choices that impact another, we ask ourselves, what would he or she ask me to do? When we bear witness, we become more empowered because we're more aligned with our core values. Values such as compassion and justice. And the good news is that there is an alternative to carnism. The vegan movement, which is the counterpoint to carnism, is one of the fastest growing social justice movements in the world today. As I've mentioned, I've spoken on 5 continents, and everywhere I go, I see evidence that more and more people are waking up. I haven't been to a single country where this has not been the case. More and more people are waking up, more and more people are starting to say no to carnism, and it's becoming easier and easier to reduce our participation in the system. And the good news is also that we can make minor changes that will have a major impact. We can reduce and ultimately eliminate our consumption of meat, eggs, and dairy. We reduce our participation in carnism. We can challenge carnistic bias in our lives and professions. We can be allies to the vegan movement, even if we're not fully vegan ourselves. People who do some of the most good for animals are people who are not necessarily vegan. When I talk to media professionals who help raise awareness of carnism and encourage people to reflect on their food choices and reduce their participation in the system, those articles sometimes reach millions of people, and they're published by people who are not yet vegan themselves. So we can use our own lives to raise awareness of and challenge carnism. And of course, we can spread carnism awareness. I believe that it is impossible to have a truly objective conversation about eating animals as long as we are talking from within the very system that conditions us to believe that eating animals is legitimate and appropriate. And so I believe that when carnism awareness reaches enough people, reaches critical mass, it can bring about a global paradigm shift. So coming full circle, or almost full circle. The first picture you saw of me and Fritz was 1970. This is 1980. I was a little older when I painted it. But Fritz, as you may recall, was my first dog and my first friend. And in many ways, he was also my first teacher. Fritz taught me that to respect someone is to respect that no matter how different from us they have a life that matters to them. Fritz taught me to be a witness. He taught me that love is a verb. And this is why the goal of my presentation here today, the goal of my life's work, is to raise awareness of carnism. Because we are all participants in the system, for better or worse. So our choice is not whether we participate, but how we participate. And with awareness, we can choose to be active witnesses rather than passive bystanders. With awareness, we can lead more authentic and freely chosen lives. And then we can more truly become, as Gandhi said, the change that we wish to see. Thank you. Thank you. What? I don't understand. Oh, if I need some water. Oh, okay, thanks, I have some water. So before we open up to questions, I want to just point out, my organization, and I didn't introduce myself earlier, I'm sorry. I am Dr. MELANIE JOY, and I'm the president of Beyond Carnism. And the goal of our organization is to expose and transform carnism globally. We're based in the US, but we have a project in Germany, and we operate globally. So please come visit us. Our website's going through a major overhaul right now, but soon it will have all of the resources back up on it. And one of the things that is on the website that would be great if you could share is I have a TEDx talk on carnism. It's 18 minutes long, and it's a great way to share this information with it. Thank you.